Greetings, grade 5s. Good to have you with us again. Today we're going to have a look at pie charts. The usual start of lesson reminders: if you'd like to email me anything, if you'd like to cover a particular topic, go over something, you need some help with something specific, you can email me. I'm Mr. T or Mr. Travis. It's grade5@WorksheetCloud.com. And do remember, after this, and just click on that link above, do the worksheet, make sure that you've mastered this topic, and that you're good to go when you do this in class. Also, as per usual, the next slide is going to be your mental arithmetic for the day, the thing that wakes your brain up, the thing that helps you to practice these things so they become second nature and you barely even need to think about them. You get 40 seconds, 10 questions, you just write down the answer, and we'll go through them straight away. 40 seconds, start now. And your 40 seconds are up. You can see that I've used the 9 times table today. With these things, I've been doing mental arithmetic a long time. I don't write the answers down anywhere. I just work them out as we go through. I hope I haven't made any mistakes. I'm fairly confident that I haven't, but let's go through. So have a look at number 1. Anything times 1 is itself. And then number 3, anything times 0 is 0. But let's go through them. Number 1, 9 times 1 is 9. 9 times 3 is 27. 9 times 0 is 0. 9 times 5 is 45. 9 times 7 is 63. 9 times 10 is 90. 9 times 2 is 18. 9 times 9 is 81. 9 times 6 is 54. And 9 times 4 is 36. If you missed any of those, just rewind and have a look. If you're curious to know why there's a pig in the picture, it's because this is a pre-designed slideshow from slidescarnival.com, and this one is around the year of the pig, the Chinese year of the pig, which is why there's a pig in this, and you'll notice pigs in the background of some of the other ones. On to today's task like this. Different smileys today. Just take a note that in the last line you can see that there are 2 heart eye smileys or heart eye emojis, and there's 2 winky tongue out emojis. I don't know what you call that actually. I suppose making a joke emoji. So just careful of that, and also just be aware that in the last line you've got bedmass to remember. So that's the order of operations. Okay, get going with that. I'm going to switch across so I can write on it. And give you a little while to try before I help you. Yeah, that's long enough. If you'd like any more time, just pause the video. Right, so in fact, I think we had the same thing in our first line in one of the other lessons recently. But 3 things that add up to 30, and those things need to be the same. That's 10. So I can put 10 where we've got each of those faces. But down at the bottom, you'll notice that there are 2 of them, one behind the other. And if there are 2 10s, that would be 20. All right, so we've got those ones. Let's have a look at the little, I suppose, devil face is what we would call it. Well, we've got to get to 25. We already have 2 10s, which makes up the 20 part, so we still need 5, which means that the devil face is worth 5. And we can put those in for all of them. Having a look at the heart face, in the next line we need to get to 17. We already have 2 10s, 2 5s, which comes to 10, so we still need another 7. Nope, Pink's not a good color. Yeah, green's better. So one smiling face. Actually, maybe we try black. One smiling face is one heart face is worth 7, so 2 heart faces would be worth 14, 2 sevens. Right, and we're on to the final line, remembering that we use bed mass to do our order of operations. So writing that down, bed mass. Multiplication comes first before addition. So we're going to do the multiplication first. So 5 times 20. I'll do it on the side. Well, I've got my smiling 0, so I've just moved that across from over here. Then I say 5 times 2 is 10, so I know that the answer to this part of it is 100. I've now got 14 plus 100, which comes to 114. There we go. If you ever want to do these on your own, you just search for a puzzle, maths puzzle pictures, I think is the easiest way to find them. They're quite fun. I like to do them sometimes in my spare time. Well, let's have a look at today's lesson. So you can see another one of the pig-themed slides. I'm Mr. T. I guess that's me on the rock on the left-hand side. So pie charts is what we're going to look at, and not a pork pie, a different kind of pie, but it is shaped like a pie, as in it's round. So our goals for today are to be able to understand what pie charts are, and we're not going to have to construct them, and then be able to find information based on a pie chart. So look at a pie chart and work some things out. So pie charts, what is very important to understand is that whatever information you have, all of that information is represented by the full circle. So all of it together is the whole circle, and then how much you have adds up. So it's great for seeing how a total, all of it, is shared out. So if you were sharing out a budget and you needed to see how much money went to each person, that's a good way to see it. Yeah, if you're sharing things out, it's a really nice way to see who gets how much of it. And I suppose it looks like a pie, as in it's round, and when you cut out slices, it's like slices of pies. And I guess in this one, we can see that whoever gets the orange slice is going to have a lot more pie than anyone else. And you can see that the number shows that as well. So we often have, like in this one, percentages as around the outside, but sometimes we have numbers, and sometimes it's shown as a fraction. And yeah, as a fraction is probably something that you might come across a little bit more in sort of grade 5 level, but majority of them are done as percentages, with 100% being the whole circle. So if you add up these percentages, you'll get to 100. So if I add, and I'll do this the way I would do this, 31 and 19 I add because the 9 and the 1 go nicely together. That comes to 50%. And then if I add 6 and 46, it comes to 50. So if I add 50 and 50, I get 100. So that's the whole circle is 100%. Here is one where we've just got the numbers. So you can see, I'm not really worried about what's represented by this. But it is sports books. Obviously, Rangers is one of the teams that it was. This is the theatre books, music books, press, which is to do with newspapers and stuff, and broadcast, which is to do with TV and stuff. Okay, so yes, so in this one, it's not done as percentages, it's done as number of people who specifically said each one of these. So if we wanted to know how many people altogether said each one of these, we could add it up. So 22 plus 24 gives me 46. 56, and then another 7 makes it 63, 73, 81, 91, 100. So in fact, this is out of 100, and these not only represent how many people answered that, but they also represent a percent, because percent is always out of 100. I'm not going to labor too much on percent because it's not something that's covered particularly much in grade 5. Here's an example of one that's done with fractions, although I haven't drawn the fractions in. So this piece of the pie chart could be represented as a half. This one could be represented as a quarter. So we could say let's say that we were looking at favorite fruit, and we could say that half of the people surveyed like apples the most. A quarter of the people who were surveyed liked pears the most. An eighth, so there would be, if we had this shape all around, there'd be 8 of them. So an eighth liked bananas, and a 16th liked oranges, and a 16th, because those are both 1/16th, liked berries. I don't know. So this could be represented as a fraction, and it's quite nice because the size of the pieces works with fractions. So a half, and a quarter, and an eighth, and these are each a 16th. And if you cut that one in half, it'd be a 32th. Not a 32th, meaning 1 out of 32. So what might you be asked to do with pie charts or pie graphs, also called pie graphs? You might be asked, like, which is the most or least popular, that kind of question. So which two things had the same number of people like them, or were equally popular, or equally unpopular. Then you might be asked questions like how many people were surveyed, and sometimes it's easiest adding them all up, and sometimes, as you'll see in one of our examples, you've got to do a little bit of working out. And then if you know how many people there are altogether, then how many people were in a specific group. So it's another one of the examples we'll have a look at. All right, so let's start off by having a look at this one. So I've got a graph here. I picked fruit that people liked as what we were looking at. And the only one where I've said how many people it was who liked that was in apples. But we're going to be able to work everything else out based on the sizes of the various pieces. So first up, if you have a look at pears and you look at apples, although it's at a different angle, each of them is showing a quarter of the circle. So if there were 4 people who liked apples, then 4 people would like pears as well. And so we can put next to pears that 4 people. Then have a look at bananas. And I hope you can see that bananas is half the size of apples. So if I had done that, I would get a piece that was the size of bananas. So 4 people was apples, and half of 4 is 2, and so we can say that 2 people like bananas. And then using a little bit of some brainiac stuff, we can see that if we had a line there, then this piece would be worth 4, and this piece is the same as the banana size piece. So altogether, berries is 6. So how many people were surveyed altogether? To work that out, we can add up each of the pieces, and you'll see that we've got 6 plus 4 is 10, plus 2 is 12, and then plus the apples, which is already on the chart, comes to 16, and so 16 people were surveyed altogether. Right, I'm going to put another one up now. Okay, so I've used the same graph, and let's just talk about these were the colors that people chose as their favorite. So red, yellow, green, or blue, what was your favorite? We asked 64 people that, and now we want to find out how many people, actual people, liked each of the following. And so we've got to work that out. All right, so we can see that the red is a quarter of the whole amount. So in fact, what we're doing is an of sum, which we learned how to do. So a quarter of the 64 that we surveyed. So just a reminder of sums, if you can't remember them, we ask ourselves, how many times does 4 go into 64? If you can't do that in your head, we're quickly and rather messily apparently, going to work that out on the left-hand side. 4 goes into there once with 2 left over. 4 goes into 24 6 times. So the answer there, then we go. So it was 16. 16 times 1 is 16. There's our answer. So 16 people like red the best. So 16. And we can very easily just, because we know that this is the same, we can just write that in. I'm a big fan of efficiency. I was going to say shortcuts, but that sounds negative. It has a negative connotation to it. So let's say I'm a big fan of efficiency. Anyway, I'll leave it out for now. Let's have a look at yellow. So this is half the size. In other words, it's 1/8. So we're looking for, let's use a different color. We're looking for 1/8 of 64. So there's that horrible little moniker. I ate and I ate and I was sick on the floor. 8 times 8 is 64. I just like to remember that 8 goes into 64 8 times. Then 8 times 1 is 8. And so my answer then for 1/8 of 64 is 8. So there were 8 people that liked yellow the best. As we already said for green, 16 people liked, oh God, that's a horrible color. 16 people liked that the best, 16. And now we've got blue, and we've got to see how much of that, how much of the circle that is. So you could say, well, I've got 64. Let's do that a little bit this way. I've got 64, and I used 16 for red and 8 for that other one, and 16 for green, and you could minus them all to find out how many are left over, and that would be blue. But you could also work out what the fraction was for that. So when we're doing fractions, if you remember fractions, we want all the fractions to be the same. So I'm going to just make an equivalent fraction for this. So I'm going to times the top by 2 and the bottom times 2, because what you do to the top, you do to the bottom. So those two are equal, but I just wanted it 8 at the bottom. This will also be 2 over 8. So I have 2 over 8, 3 over 8, 4, 5 over 8. So I've used up 5 over 8, and that means I've got another 3 over 8 left. And that's the final one, so 3 over 8. Right, so I'm actually looking for an of sum that says 3/8 of 64. So this time we've got a practice of sums, but it doesn't have a 1 at the top. So let's check. 8 into 64. Well, we've done that a couple of times. So it's 8. 8 times 3, 8, 16, 24. So my answer then is 24, and I can then put that 24 people chose blue altogether. And if you add up 24 and 16 and 8 and another 16, you will get to 64, which is how many people were surveyed altogether. So as I said, sometimes you will be asked, you will be given how many people there are and need to find out how many people chose each of those particular things. Right, let's have a look at this graph, which shows which which browser people used on their computers. All right, so this is some quite straightforward questions, or are some quite straightforward questions. The first one, let's look at the various ones. We've got Chrome, so it's Google Chrome. We've got Internet Explorer, which is Microsoft. We've got Firefox, which is one of the open source ones. We've got Safari, which is to do with iPads and Macs. Opera, which is another open source one, and Other. So Other is actually not one, it's got a couple together, and that's why, although it's the last slice, it's bigger than Opera, but Opera is just the one platform, and then the others together add up to 2%. So you will notice also that with pie charts, we arrange them from biggest to smallest. Not normally this way, but you can see that it goes bigger, smaller, 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 smaller. Right, so first question, which browser was the most popular? In other words, which has the biggest slice? And you don't even really need to look at the numbers to be able to see that the orange one, Chrome, is definitely the most popular. So the most popular is Chrome. Who is Firefox's closest rival? So in other words, which one is very close to the size of Firefox? That would be Internet Explorer. Internet Explorer. And finally, how many people were surveyed? Now, it's not actually possible to get an actual answer for that. We're unable to see exactly how many people were surveyed, but we can make some judgments. So first of all, I can tell quite easily that it was definitely more than 100 people that were surveyed. or it definitely was not 100, because otherwise we would have a problem and you wouldn't get a situation where you had 46,6, because how could you have 0.6 of a person? So that's not an actual possibility. So it could have been 1,000, just looking at it, which would mean that you had 466 people who were voting for one. That would work. So it could be at least 1,000. It could be more than that. So based on the point, the decimal point, I know that it's definitely not 100, but there's actually no real way to know exactly how many people are surveyed in this particular survey. Let's have a look at another one. All right, looking at the world's oil reserves from 2014, some incredibly big numbers here. So I don't know if you can see the BBL there. That stands for billion liters. So if we look for how much oil there is in in Asia and Eurasia, Asia and Oceania, which is that top slice, the small one next to North America, we can see that is 46, we'll call it 46 billion liters, and that's only 3% of the world's oil. Looking at our questions, where can most of the world's oil be found? In other words, which has the biggest slice? Well, that's the Middle East. Which continent has the least oil? So now you've got to look around, and based on this, I suppose we would have to say that it would be Europe. Although, if you were thinking really cleverly, you might say Antarctica, because Antarctica doesn't even feature on this pie chart. So either there's very little or there's none at all on Antarctica. That's the South Pole. And finally, could the rest of the world together compete with the Middle East? So that's an interesting question, and I don't think you'll get something this complicated at a grade 5 level. But sort of mathematically, the answer would be yes, because together, if you add all of the other ones up, it comes to 51, which is more than the Middle East, which is 49. But in reality, I think there'd be problems with agreeing on certain things, and the other difficulty is that although the Middle East has only 49% of the world's oil, they don't actually use 49% of the rest of the world's oil. So in fact, although the rest of the world controls 51% of the world's oil, they use a lot more than 51%. So I don't think they could really realistically compete with the Middle East. Difficult question. Okay, the last one I want to have a look at, which is I'm not going to put any questions up, but it's interesting that you might get a question like this, and that's where you've got two pie charts and you need to compare the two pie charts. So for example, these two pie charts are looking at the same thing in two different countries. So this is the diet of Chinese people who have lived to over 100 years old, and this is the diet of Korean people who have lived to be over 100 years old. And you can see that there's quite a different makeup in the two. So interestingly, you might be asked questions like who has a more varied diet, meaning they eat a wider range of things, and then we would have to say the Koreans, because if you look at their pie chart, there are more things that go into it, whereas the Chinese one is fairly simple. So you can see that more than half of what the Chinese people who've lived to over 100 years old ate was sweet potatoes. That's interesting. I don't know that I could eat that much of my diet be sweet potatoes. But then cereals and grains, you can see beans. Then you've got fat, which might be oils or other things as well. Yeah, and then you've got vegetables, and finally only 2% meat. So in fact, in the diet of Chinese people who've lived to be older than 100, 98% of what they've eaten has been vegetarian. So only 2% of what they eat is meat. It's not saying they are all vegetarian, but what it is saying is that they don't eat very much meat. And then if we have a look over here at the Korean one, you can see grains and cereal make up more than a quarter of what they eat. Vegetables and seaweed make up also more than a quarter of what they eat. And then you've got fruit and kimchi and anyway, lots of different things over here. But also they don't eat a lot of meat. They eat more than the Chinese people who've lived to that age, but almost 90. So 89.5% of their food the food that they eat is vegetarian. That's also looking at people who've lived to 100 or older. Just an interesting thing. I'm not asking you to go and change your diet. It just happened to be a graph that I came across, two graphs that were graphing the same thing. And I wanted to just talk about the fact that sometimes you'd be asked to compare two graphs, and you can see the sorts of questions that you'd be asked when comparing them. Okay, that's all that I wanted to cover with pie charts and reading off them. I do want you to click on that link above and do the worksheet and make sure that you're able to read information off some pie charts, which is always useful. And it comes up in mental maths, and it comes up at least once a year until you finish with primary school. Plus, it's one of those things that actually comes up quite often in real life when they want to show you how things have been spent or how things have been shared and that sort of thing. So it's good to be able to understand them. So do that worksheet just to make sure that you know how to do it. And if you also, just a reminder at the end of the lesson, if you want to email me, it's grade5@worksheetcloud.com. And that's if you have anything you want to cover, if you've got a problem with anything, if you found a mistake in one of my memos that I might have made. It does happen. I'm human too. Anyway, grade 5s, have a fantastic day. It's been lovely having you with me. Goodbye.